though I do a lot of research. I like research. I like doing
Mhm.
research. I enjoy it. If I'm not careful, it becomes a form of procrastination rather
Okay.
than because writing is hard. And so, like,
Mhm.
oh, you know what? I'll read another book on this subject, or I'll travel over to here just to get a couple of photographs of it rather than sitting and writing today.
Welcome to the Delos Diaries, where we explore the untamed frontier of writing and creativity. Join your host, Paul Delos Santos, a writer and self-published author, as he navigates the ever-evolving world of storytelling.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Delos Diaries. I'm Paul Delos Santos. I'm here with Bill McCormick. Bill, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you today, Paul?
I'm doing well, doing well. Just another day in the world of a podcaster and writer. So you know how that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I was always asked this question first to start things off. But how did you get interested in writing?
Um, I've always been a storyteller, even since I was a little boy, and I would sit around and tell tales to my friends. I won some awards in Cub Scouts as a ghost storyteller, and so when it became natural for me to sort of like take the oral storytelling into a more permanent form, I began to write the stories down, and that's really sort of how it evolved.
So, what kind of stories were you telling as a kid? I mean, I'm just interested to know.
A lot of sort of ghost stories and suspense stories. People walking around the woods with something out there that they don't know what it is or who it
Mhm.
is, those sort of things.
Kind of set you up for your future writing as
Absolutely,
a thriller and
absolutely.
mystery writer. So what?
Yeah,
So what made you? Is that the kind of the influence that kind of put you into position to become a mystery thriller writer?
yeah. I've always been very interested in the unknown and things that are a little bit spooky. Um, but I have a lot of also interest in the rest of the world. So I started setting my stories in interesting places that I lived, and as I did so, they sort of moved from horror to taking advantage of the influence of the places that I lived, and became more thriller esque and more realistic and more grounded. But there's always still that element of horror and danger and that sort of thing.
Just the type of like what makes a good mystery? You think? I mean, because it's always been interesting to me. Because for mystery writers, you have to have that. You got to walk a fine line. It seems like with tension and allure. So how is it that how what makes a successful mystery novel?
Well, I mean, a successful mystery novel, you've got to keep the reader engaged. They got to have the steps to try to find out who, if it's a who done it, who did it, or if it's a how catch 'em, how the person will get caught, or what the resolution is. But the real trick, I think, uh, is to always play fair with your audience. A lot of mystery writers, even some of the most famous mystery writers, they cheat a little bit. They don't give all the information that a reader would need to figure out what's happening or who did it. And I think that to make a successful book, you always have to you subtly put in what's in there and give the reader a fair chance to figure it out.
So, I mean, because I've never written a mystery, and I very rarely read them. I mean, I think the closest one that I read was when I was a kid, the Hardy Boys mysteries. I mean, as a kid reading those. I mean, just overall, just how is it that how what's the process like in developing a mystery? Like working back in your writing process, how do you develop? Like, do you go right to the conclusion and just move backwards, or do you come up with like a story as it goes on?
It varies by the book, but quite often you'll think of, so let's say it's a murder mystery.
Mhm.
You'll think of some clever way for somebody to kill someone or to commit a murder. And as dark as that might be, then you try to build a story around that. Like, well, if someone would actually do this, how could they get caught? Or there's a subgenre of mystery writing called the how catch them.
Mhm.
The old Columbo television show used to be
Oh.
a how catch them, and the idea is the audience knows ahead of time who did it. It's how they'll screw up, and the detective or the policeman will catch that person, and so you follow along from the murderer's point of view as it gets more and more tense. I did a story that was in a Crime Writers Association anthology a few years ago called Matricide and Ice Cream, about a guy that bumps off his mother on a train in Ukraine, and you get to know how he does it immediately. He uses, well, slightly poisoned ice cream, I guess, and then it's how will he mess up? How will he get caught? And so anyway, so yeah, usually I think of some horrible crime, and then sometimes because I've lived in so many places, interesting places. I've lived in Russia, I've lived in Ukraine, I've lived in Latvia, Estonia, United Kingdom, Canada. Then the setting will come, and once I have a setting and have a crime, then usually they build from there.
Oh wow, that's a good way to put it. I mean, you get to play reverse Clue. It seems like.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, you mentioned that you lived in Eastern Europe. So,
I
how
did.
was that experience like in general, and how did that influence your writing settings? I mean, as you probably were initially culture shocked, I would assume.
A little bit. I decided to write my first novel, a book called Lenin's Harem, which is not a mystery novel. It's a more of a serious historical book about a family that's trying to survive in Latvia and Russia during the first half of the 20th century. And I decided to write it, and I had never been to that part of the world, and I flew over, planning to live a year. I ended up living 3 years at that time, with no visa, no friends, no home, no job, no anything. So it was pretty daunting. But once you get there, I sort of became absorbed with learning about the history of the people and all the things they had gone. Um, Latvia, where this particular book is set, is at the sort of crossroads between Russia and Western Europe and Germany and Scandinavia. And so many things had happened to the people that live there over the years, and how it affected them and their influences. And that really moved me. And I decided to write a serious book about what it would be like to live there. And to my surprise, it was very well received in Latvia. Latvia's largest publisher translated it and published it in Latvian, and it was a top 10 hit in that country. And people knew me on the street for a little while. I had my 15 minutes of fame. So I sort of became enthralled with living over there because of that experience, and continued to live, trying to use my fiction to always tell the real stories behind it of what these people have gone through and what my own experiences as a foreigner living in these places were, whether it be mysterious or humorous or very serious or even political.
Oh wow, you touched on all bases, and like when did this happen? So I gotta get some context on like was it post the wall falling or like
Oh yeah,
how?
it was
Okay,
definitely post the wall falling.
yeah, okay.
Um, no, I went to Latvia for the first time 21 years ago now in 2000, October of 2004. It's
Oh
the
wow.
first time I went there, and
So it's man, you mentioned Latvia. I mean, and other places in Eastern Europe. How has it influenced you in terms of like the culture and what's some of the differences in culture when it comes to like writing a story based in Latvia or Eastern Europe?
well, difference in cultures as opposed to like in the West, I
Yeah,
suppose.
the West, yes.
Yeah. Well, the first thing you get over there is you quickly learn that people are people. They're the same wherever you go. I mean, they want the same things: the happiness, security, et cetera, et cetera. But they are influenced by their history, and so you get certain groups that may be more reserved, and you see the social conflicts that they have over there. And there's a Russian population, for example, in Latvia, and a Latvian population, and they don't intermix uh, terribly. And what does that do to a society? And you sort of get that feeling. Or then you go to the Ukrainians, and I was living in Ukraine before the Russian invasion, and really the Ukrainians could not ever imagine themselves at war with Russia because their cultures are very, very similar. As opposed to say the Latvians, who are closer to the Scandinavians in feel. And so you sort of absorb that. Um, but when I wrote my serious book, Lenin's Harem, right, this is it right here.
Mhm.
Um, I made my main character a German, an ethnic German, because he's an outsider to this part of the world, and I'm an outsider. And so, as an outsider, I could use that to explain what he didn't understand and what he was learning about to the reader. So, quite often, I'll make my protagonist an outsider, not only as a device to help give me excuses to explain things to my audience, to my readers, but also because his perspective will be closer to my own.
Mm.
But there are several novels where I have protagonists of that era. I have a series of short stories with a Latvian reporter called Santa Ezerina that are extremely popular. As a matter of fact, she's one of the main characters in the book KGB Banker, which won an award for best conspiracy thriller. But that's easier in the thriller or mystery genre, where there are tropes of the genre, where there are certain expectations. I mean, Agatha Christie's most famous detective is a Belgian, and she wasn't a
Mm.
Belgian. So you can do that if you're writing the mystery drama. If you're writing a serious historical, I always felt I should sort of be the outsider.
You mentioned that it allows you to write from a perspective, like write characters who understand your perspective. I mean, do you feel that you have to have that perspective to write a good main character, good protagonist sometimes?
Um, have to as a mandatory? No, I mean there's certain universal human themes, but I
Mm.
do think that getting that perspective gives you um, an accuracy, a perception, just a realism in your book. And there's certain things that a character who's from certain places and has experienced certain things is more likely or less likely to do. So, I tell all my foreign friends that I'm constantly studying them to try to use them in my books. That's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how often do you use real life people to influence you?
Not terribly often. Of course, and when I do, they're usually an amalgamation of several characters.
Actually.
The closest was in that novel KGB Banker. Actually, I worked with a real life whistleblower. He was an American who went over to Riga, Latvia, to work in a bank and found out there's a real life scandal that was billions of euros and dollars were being stolen by this group. He tried to blow the whistle and had to flee the country because he got some very scary phone calls, and has since spent his time trying to alert the world to this horrible scheme and this horrible uh, what's the best word for it? Horrible scheme and horrible uh, uh, crime that is going
Mm.
on in the world. So, having known this man, is a gentleman named John Christmas. Uh, in KGB Banker, I made a fictionalized character that is inspired by John Christmas, and so that's the closest to a real person that I've ever had in a book. Everybody else is pretty much an amalgamation of certain character traits or certain imaginations that I've had for here and there.
It's like it's funny is that you like I think we all do it as writers. We get influence from other people and we're like, that's a good character trait. I'm gonna pull that into someone and kind of just kind of pick and choose like the traits we want to add to our characters, it seems like when we're writing. So it's just one of those, when you mentioned that you had one situation, I'm like, okay, that's actually pretty accurate that most of us will only have like one real comparison person, but everyone else is an amalgamation. So
Right.
when you put them in these awkward spots though, like how do you approach that? I mean, how do you approach that situation where, you're putting them as an outsider or you're putting them as someone who's really in debt and really ingrained in the society? Like, how do you approach that with the traits that you're writing them from?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by approach that. I mean, I think taking an outsider and putting him or her in a situation where, as the outsider, they may not understand what's happening, or they may have a natural conflict, or they may be
Mm.
the group that they're entering may resist them or have prejudices against them, or whatever it might be. That gives you natural conflict, and all stories have conflict at some level
Mm.
in them. So I tend to, once you create these characters, they do have a life of their own. So you put the character in this situation, and then you just see what happens, what would naturally happen, rather than plot it all out. It's the characters themselves drive it, and if you
Mm.
make your characters based on you know real experiences, what a person from that part of the world or that situation is in, I think you can usually figure out what avenues they might take to extract themselves from that difficult situation.
So you're a pantser basically. And
I I am a pantser when it comes to anything other than I usually I usually have my idea for how the book ends and how the book begins, and then I figure out how to connect those two aspects.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So, so,
usually
so, so you're mostly a pantser, but you have the beginning and end in mind.
right. Yeah, usually.
So, how much work goes into those beginnings and ends? I mean, because I know you have to plot them out, because that's the only areas you plot. I mean,
Well, a lot of work goes into those beginning and ends. I mean, the beginnings, especially, you usually write those first three chapters and you polish and polish them all. I used to be a member of a online group which is now defunct called youriteon.com, which was sponsored by the UK's Literary Arts Council. And you could put up your first three chapters and get feedback from a lot of other people about what they thought, et cetera, et cetera. And I did a lot of writing up there to see which chapters, which openings, were best received, which brought people in, sucked people into my books, and so you get those really polished. But the ironic thing is then you go write the rest of the novel, and quite often those first three chapters you end up having to rip up, as good as they might be, because you didn't know your own characters at that point.
mm,
You sort of discover who the characters are as you go through the book, as you go through the creation process. And so you go back and then you read your first three chapters and you're like, oh, it's not who they are. It's not who they've been, And so that's a saying actually in writing that you usually will lose your opening chapters. And that's sort of been my experience. Yeah.
when you mentioned that the characters live their own lives, I mean, does that frustrate you sometimes, or does that excite you in terms of like just seeing a character like do something that you weren't thinking they were going to do, and all of a sudden they do it?
No, that's wonderful. It's amazing when some character does something. You're like, no, no, she would definitely call the police in this situation. She would not keep this a secret or something like that. But of course that can force you to write yourself into corners where you're
Mm.
like, well, this character, I don't really want this character to do this, but I have no choice because she would do that. So I guess it can be frustrating, but overall it's a good way, because if you're having those problems, it means your characters are well defined and are sort of coming to life. And if they come to life for me, hopefully they'll come to life for my readers.
So, what do you think makes a good character to bring them to life?
Um, a good character should, first of all, seem like they possibly could exist. That the reader doesn't go, oh, this is just a fabrication of the author. Uh, and they should be human enough at some level that there's something relatable about them, and that even includes your antagonist, your worst, most evil, most terrible person. If there's something about them that humanizes them, that actually makes them more terrifying, because you're like, wow, this person, what went wrong that they ended up this way, So as far as your protagonist, even if it's a person from a different era, a different country, a different gender, a different occupation, whatever it might be, if you can find something that humanizes them a little bit, and also they come across as real, making real decisions that the reader buys, then I think you've got a good character.
Good characters seem to be a hallmark of thrillers. I mean, because
Yeah.
there's like a lot of things. So, what makes a thriller? What makes a character work in a thriller? Like, what are some of the aspects of a thrillers that work for you?
Um, Aspects of thrillers that work for me. Well, I mean, thrillers by their nature uh, have to thrill, right? So you have to have
Hmm.
a plot where it engages the reader quickly. There are other forms of genre writing. Certainly, horror, you can do a slow burn. Um, Mysteries, you can set up the mystery slow, but a thriller, usually from page one, has to grip people and keep them turning those pages. Um, and there has to be a driving plot line. Now, there may be several secondary plots that intercedes, and of course, you want to have twists, and you want to have your action endings, um, but you have to have at least one plot line that the reader has to say, "I have to know what happens next. I can't put this book down." Um, and the other thing is there's got to be a high degree of suspense.
Hmm.
One of the best ways of doing suspense, of course, is to find a way of telling the reader something that the character doesn't know. I mean, the stereotypical classical thing is if the readers know that there is a murderer waiting in the next room, but your protagonist doesn't know it, then you're shouting, "Don't go in the next room" to that person. but you can't stop them because they're, it's a work of fiction, and you're turning the pages to see if they do indeed go in the next room. I mean, that's an easy example, but it's the same sort of thing. That helplessness of the reader to interfere when they know
Mhm.
that a character that they've bonded with is in danger. If you can get that going, and you can get it going fairly early in the book, I think people will keep reading the whole time.
You know, is there anything like, mystery seems to be a slow burn mystery will probably be on the opposite end of that concept. I mean, so what do you do to kind of bring those two together in terms of like, how do you pace the slow burn mystery so that you do keep the reader engaged? Because slow burns tend to be a little more investment from the reader's perspective.
Well, slow burns, yeah. If you do a slow burn, you have to have other aspects that keep them reading until first the inciting incident, but whatever else terrible is going to happen. So you do it for lots of atmosphere.
Mhm.
So you create an eerie scene for this setting. Lots of setting. You're placing setting. Again, good characterization, so you like the characters. Often humor. If you can balance your humor without losing tension, then people. That's also another way that readers bond with characters. If you laugh with a character, no matter how many terrible things they may do, readers will tend to bond with them. I have a novella called "A Stranger from the Storm," and this is about two teenage girls in Odessa whose family has a lodging house, and they think the new person that has come to live in the lodging house might be a murderer. Well, that's a very much a slow burn story. He arrives. There's these little hints that something strange about this guy, something might be up about him as the girls start to explore, and it builds and builds and builds in there. But I think it works because of the inherent mystery of, well, what's wrong with this guy? What's going on with this guy? And because I've made a very atmospheric place. I went to Odessa, where I was set 8 times, and went down in the catacombs beneath Odessa and explored it. So I had a pretty good feel for the setting, and I put a lot of black Hitchcockian humor in it, so that you're having a good time even before the horror side of it starts going in. So that's an example of a slow burn. If you pull the character in through setting and characterization, then you can take your time, and it'll matter more once the darkness really descends.
Mhm. You lived in Odessa and you also lived in Eastern Europe. Like all these settings, like what is it like to recreate these worlds in your own imagination, like without taking what like how do you take basically how do you take liberties with the fictional sense, or do you really stick to what it feels like, what they are accurately?
Um, I don't take liberties very often.
Mhm.
I do my best to be accurate. Um, But I got my Master's of Arts in novel writing at the University of Manchester, and my instructor at Manchester was a British writer named Martin Bedford, and he told me something that I never forget. He says, be as accurate as you can when he was referring to history or setting or whatever. He says, but the needs of the story always come first.
Oh.
So you do your best to be accurate, but if the story requires some alteration from reality, then you do it. You try to do it subtly. You try to do it in a way that won't offend people, but sometimes you do it. My first ever published story was a short story in Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine called Blue Amber, and it was nominated for a Derringer Award. It was very well received. It's about a convict trying to escape uh, from this beach in Latvia, and he's manacled. And I said, "Well, how could he get off the beach? He might be able to run off the beach." And I said, "Well, that'd be a problem." So I added cliffs that actually aren't there in that place in
Mm.
Latvia. And I was worried that my Latvian friends would know, but nobody else knows. And even my Latvian friends didn't mind when they read it because it was such a good story. So again, the story comes first. But yes, I do my best to be historically accurate, setting accurate as I can. And again, in thrillers, a little artistic license is expected. In more serious works like Lenin's Harem that I showed you, I took no artistic license that I can think of. I mean, it was I worked with museum curators and historians and numerous people to get everything 100%. But living over there 20 years, some of this is ingrained in me, and it's not so much that I have to worry about accuracy. It's remembering to explain stuff that now I take for granted because I've lived over there so long.
Mhm. How much research goes into your stories? It seems like a lot of time is effort is spent on trying to get, especially for Lennon's Harem. It seems like a lot of time went into researching that to kind of make it historically accurate, along with the settings accuracy.
Yeah, a lot of research went in. Lennon's Harem took 3 years. 2 of it was pretty much research. Only 1 year of it was writing. All my books, though, I do a lot of research. I like research. I like doing research. I enjoy it. If I'm not careful, it becomes a form of procrastination rather
Okay.
than, because writing is hard. And so, like,
Hmm.
oh, you know what? I'll read another book on this subject, or I'll travel over to here just to get a couple of photographs of it rather than sitting and writing today. So I have to balance that. I have to balance because if I could find a way to make a living doing it, I could sit around just researching everything all the time. But
Hmm.
I do put a lot of research into all my books. It's not effort for me because I enjoy learning about these things. So and what happens is you absorb so much as you're researching one thing, new ideas come for other stories while you're doing that. And whether that research is something you're reading or somewhere you're going or someone you're interviewing, talking to.
Hmm. So is that what advice do you have for readers who are struggling to write? I mean, you mentioned it's a hard thing to do, and we all find ways to productively procrastinate, whether it's research or we get into other things. Like, so how do you overcome that procrastination?
The best way is get some form of routine,
Hmm.
and you should become a slave to the routine. We all try to want to leave these independent lives, but if you get yourself in a routine where you're writing every day, even if turns out you only get 300, 200 usable words a day. Well, if you do that every day, you'll have a novel in 6 months.
Hmm.
It won't take long. And so for me, like I when I'm in Europe, I go to coffee houses, sit in a cafe, and write all day. I get away. I turn off my phone. I get away from the Wi-Fi and the internet, so there's no distraction. So I would say first, for any person who's trying to first find out what works for you. Where can you write where you can actually get writing done? If you're a family person, do you need to get away from the kids? Do you need to get away from the house? Of course, a lot of more successful authors, they have some sort of room that's separate but near their house, like in the backyard they have a shed where they sit and write and things like that. So get yourself in a situation where you can write, and then don't worry about the problem. If you haven't done the research, if you don't know how the story ends, don't worry about it now. Get it out of your brain and onto a page or into a Word document, uh, and make sure you do that every single day. And if you get it done every single day, then it won't be very long where you have a completed story, and then you can start the second process, which is easier but not as much fun, which is the editing process.
Mm, yeah, I think a lot of writers like they look ahead to the point where like, oh, they're editing in the middle of writing. Like,
Yeah,
I think that's the worst. To me, that's the worst thing you can do because you're never gonna get anywhere because you're just constantly fixing things at the same time. Do you agree?
I 100% agree. I mean, there's this temptation to sit and polish, 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 and spend 5 days on one page, and that's great. But then you never get your book done. So I think
Mhm.
you get a first draft out and then spend the time polishing. That's how I do it.
So how long do you take on per project, so to speak, if it's a novel project? Like how long does it usually take you to go from ideation to finished product, like first draft, so to speak?
Um, Most of my the actual novels have taken about 2 years. KGB Banker took 2 years. Lennon's Harem took three. Stranger from Storm is a novella, but I had the first half of that book done, and I had the ending done, and then I could not figure out how to connect them because there was all this pressure to make it a novel, and I didn't want to pad it out. So it
Mhm.
actually parts of it actually sat around for 9 years till one night I got inspiration for how to fuse these two pieces without padding it out, which is why it became a novella. So even though that was the shortest book, and even though the actual writing time was the shortest, from concept to finish, it took the longest. But I would say on average 2 years, sometimes three. I'm not
So
Stephen King who pounds out.
Oh, not all.
3
Sorry.
books a year. It's
Yeah, no, we don't
amazing
have
what you
that
can do.
luxury yet.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Just overall, like I know a lot of beginning writers just want to start and jump to the book writing portion. Do you feel that writing short stories and kind of doing the things that kind of help you develop the writing habit, like you mentioned, and develop the storytelling chops, so to speak, can help with do short stories and other forms of like shorter media than a novel?
Yeah, first of all, writing a short story obviously is writing. So you're working
Mhm.
on your craft. You're gaining skill with description and characterization and plot. And the neat thing about short stories is they're so trimmed down to the essence of what a story has to be. That's really good training for your novels. Um, my first published story was Blue Amber, which I told you was a short story in Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine. So you can have some success that'll spur you on because you can write a novel and spend years trying to get an agent or years trying to get a publisher, and it's very easy to get frustrated. But if you write your short story and you get it done, you can have some success. And actually, I love the short form, so I think it's a good starting point for people. I would recommend it. I mean, you can write a good short story, and I mean, if inspiration hits you, you can write it in 2 days, but usually about 2 weeks,
Mhm.
and then you have something to do something with, and take it from there. I mean, I just collected all of not all, but 22 of my short stories in a collection that just came out called Deeds of Darkness. Half
Mm.
of them were nominated for awards, and this is when you write enough short stories, you can put them together like this, and then you have something this is bigger than any of my novels. So I'm quite proud of that because really more than the novels themselves. That shows the breadth and range of what I've written about, and it's sort of the closest thing to a biography of where my interests go. I mean, it's not a biography; it's not about me, but biography of my interests. And yeah, so I think the short story is a natural progression. I mean, the only negative is once you get your mindset into short story writing, you become when you get inspiration, you think in terms of short stories. Right now, if I have some idea, I'm usually thinking, well, how can I turn that into a short story rather than how can I turn it into a novel? So you
Mhm.
then have to reacclimate yourself to, oh my gosh, my book's got 32 chapters. That's like 32 short stories. That's a lot of work. And conversely, I talk to novelists who are like, I can't even imagine being able to cut my story down into a short story. And so uh, there are different skills, but I think mastering them both helps you in helps you as a writer as a whole.
What advice do you have for someone who's wanting to start writing short stories? Because it seems like, like I mentioned before, everyone wants to write that book. Everyone wants to have the book in their hand. Everyone wants to be published in some way, shape, or form. So, just for someone who hasn't really thought about short stories, what advice do you have for someone who might be interested in possibly taking that route to eventually becoming moving toward longer pieces?
Well, my advice is go ahead and do it. I mean, the good
Mhm,
thing about a short story is if you write it, even if it's terrible, you only what you lost a week of your life. You write a
mhm.
novel that's terrible, you've lost a couple years of your life. So go ahead and do it. You might find you love it and enjoy it. There are many of us short story writers out there that just think that this is the best form, including Edgar Allan Poe. And uh, you'll help your craft, and really, each if you write a good book, writing good short stories will help you write page turning chapters in your novels. So because a chapter is not just a section. It should have a beginning and somewhat of an ending, even if that ending is a cliffhanger,
Mhm.
to pull you into the next chapter. So mastering the short story form certainly helps your novels, I think. And as I said, it's an experiment that doesn't take as much work, and it's easier to find a publisher. I mean, if you write a halfway decent short story and you want to publish it online, you can almost certainly find a publisher that does it. If you want to get it published in a magazine, that'll take a little longer, take a little more work, but you can get that done too. So I would encourage anybody to start working in the short story form. Um, because you also see a lot of people that have written their first novels and they're sort of meandering and they don't go anywhere. And the short story will train you to boil everything down to the essence of what really needs to be here. and that
Mhm.
I think improves your writing generally, at least your fiction writing generally.
It's funny because I'm the same way now as I move forward writing for my. I've done a lot of journalistic writing, so it's like I've done a lot of writing from that perspective. So now I know how to like rate of revelation and just all those fun things that people talk about. So now I'm moving into writing serial fiction, which I feel is like the middle ground between novel and short story, as each chapter is like an episode. So it's kind of like that from
Right.
that perspective. So it just feels like there's a lot of like I just feel there's a lot of things that writers don't consider. And I think the one thing that I do like about like writing short stories is that the feedback loop is faster.
Hmm. Hmm.
You get feedback faster on your writing, you get feedback on the story faster, and it's just how do you feel about feedback loops? And you mentioned for the first three chapters, like doing the polish, and turning in the first three chapters, so you get some feedback on this general story and take the best intros and everything like that. So getting that feedback, how important is it to get feedback on your stories quicker than waiting per se 2 years for or a year to write a novel?
Well, whether you're writing a short story or novel, I think you should always be getting feedback as you go. Getting in a writer's group where you have other writers, where you can, if it's a short story, you can hand off the short story and get their thoughts on it. Uh, is the most valuable thing you can. If you're writing a novel, then you should be in a writers group and giving chapters to your fellow writers as you're going along. Um, Not only is the feedback itself extremely useful, it'll help you tighten up your writing. It's writing is such a solitary thing that
Mhm.
just being part of the group, seeing what other people are writing, having uh, that that camaraderie and that communication with others who are working on the same thing, I think will really help you get the book done. But yeah, no, when I got my master's degree in novel writing, that's what we did. We had 2 classes a week where we would sit around and just read each other's stuff and give feedback on. And uh, during my whole career until about 2 years ago, I had one feedback partner who she read everything I ever wrote. A woman named Shirley Bozick, who's sadly passed on now. And it was very very helpful both in terms of the actual feedback she gave me, but just having a reader, somebody that you knew that was also doing the same thing as you, to sort of uh, uh, give a shared bond as you're trying to achieve these goals, because it's such a tough industry. Yeah.
So how important is it to find that group of people that know your writing and can kind of give you the right feedback? Because a lot of times a lot of people will just say like, "Oh, I'll just find someone on Reddit or just find someone who will just read my story and they'll give me your feedback." How important is it to find someone who understands you as an author, so to speak, and understands you as a person rather than just finding a reading partner?
Well, I don't know if you need to find someone who per se understands you as an author. I mean, that would be helpful because they'd probably be more willing to read your work and therefore they'd read more of it. But you have to find someone who understands writing,
Hmm.
who's going to give you good feedback. You don't want a bunch of yes men or yes women, like, give it to your mom or your best friend
Hmm.
who's going to tell you that it's great if it isn't. And so you want other people that are trying to write, or other people who are writing or in the editorial world, to give you feedback. There's lots of these writing groups. And one of the lessons I remember from my MA course was the feedback itself is useful, but don't worry about the solutions they propose as much. What you should say is, if there's something that's not working for multiple people, you have to figure out what that is. So maybe you give it out to 5 people, and 3 of them mentioned that they had an issue with this character. Maybe they all had different issues. Maybe they all proposed different solutions. Don't worry so much about the solutions, but just be that's a red flag. This character is not working. There must be some problem here. And so, the law of big numbers. The more people you give it to, if you give it to 10 people and 8 of them say that, well, I didn't like the ending, well, then maybe the ending needs work.
Hmm.
But if you only give it to one person, that person may have strange tastes or a bad day or whatever, and you don't know. So a broad swath is what you really want of fellow writers, and you find a writers group. I mean, any place that's got a halfway decent sized population, you should be able to find writers groups, and usually often in various subgenres. And of course, now in the internet world that we are in, you can find them online pretty easily. I mean, For short fiction, for example, short mystery fiction, there's a place called the Short Mystery Fiction Society, which has got, I don't know, a couple hundred people. And anytime if you become a member, it's free. You write up, I'd like to have feedback on some stories. Would somebody be willing to exchange manuscripts? You'll get usually 5 to 20 people that'll immediately raise their hand. So, and I'm sure other genres have similar sort of things. So it's a lot of opportunities. But yeah, no, feedback is one of the most important things you can possibly get.
Well, we got about 2 minutes left on our time here. What are you currently working on?
I'm working on a short story right now. The tentative title is called Sundown Desert Roads, and it's about I'm in Boulder City, Nevada now. And when I was a boy, my father and I used to drive out at night on the roads and find snakes, because they'll come out to the asphalt because it gets hot during the day, and at night the snakes like the heat of it. So that's how you can capture rattlesnakes and things like that. And I always remembered my dad taking these rattlesnakes and putting them in pillowcases and putting them in the trunk of our car. Well, so I thought, well, that would be an interesting setup for some sort of thriller story where maybe they encounter someone out there that other than a snake, or maybe they have some issue with the snake, or both. And just being out in a car, just father and son in the desert late at night, and what could go wrong when you have a car trunk full of rattlesnakes?
So that sounds fun.
That's the short story that I'm working on right now. And then I have a novel that's also set in Nevada that's going to come out in 2026 by Level Best Books called Ghost, which is a historical novel about a murderer that was out here in Nevada bumping off the lone prospectors. And that was a true story, but I've created a fictional protagonist so that he could be in all the different places at the right point. Mm. And so I'll be editing that with the people at Level Best Books. So, and then I've got another foreign language version of one of my books, KGB Banker, will be coming out in Latvia also in 2026. So I'm going to be working with the translator on that. I can't translate it, but just want to make sure that all the subtleties are translated appropriately to the foreign language. So those are the things that I'm working on at the moment.
Where can people find your work, and where can people find you? More information on you?
You can find more information on me at my website, williamburtonmccormick.com. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. My latest collection, Deeds of Darkness, is out available on Amazon, as are all my older books. I would try Deeds of Darkness as a sampler because it's got, as I said, 22 short stories, most of them award nominees, and you get a feel for my writing. Then you can, after that, delve into the full-length novels.
All right. Well, thanks, Bill, for taking time to chat with me here for a second. And I enjoyed our conversation. Hopefully you did as well.
I did very much, Paul. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you again, and we'll catch everyone later.
All right. Take care.